of suicide. So the guy gets in the cab, and the cab driver asks him, he said, what are you doing out so late at night? And the guy wasn't interested in no small talk. He wouldn't answer the cab driver. Amen. He said, just take me to the London Bridge. Amen. That was all he told him. Just take me to the London Bridge. And it said the guy, as he's going along, said the cab driver can't see hardly 2 feet in front of him because the fog is so great. And said what had normally would have took about a 20-minute ride from his house to the London Bridge, amen, has now taken almost an hour, and they can't seem to find the London Bridge. But the next thing he knows, the cab driver pulls up, and the man looks, and behold, to his eyes he sees nothing but the place from where he started. He ends right back up in his house. And man, they just driving around in a circle. And finally the guy realized, he stepped out of the cab, he looked up, he said, my Lord, my God must have heard me. Amen. He said, because instead of taking me to my death, he brought me right back home. The man was praying, the man was crying out, God, just let me make it to my death. Just take me out of here. But God never answered the man. And sometimes God does not answer for a reason. Some people pray, God, give me a sign. Some people pray over and over and over. But now this guy that had drawn around and looking for the London Bridge, trying to make it to his death, the guy ended up, his name was William Cowper. He was one of the greatest of England's 18th century poets. And that night, he ended up writing one of the greatest poems that had ever been written. And they said that he had been inspired because when he got home that night, said he opened up his Bible that he had laying on his table, and he opened up to Psalm 77, and he began to read Psalm 77 about the mercies of God, and how that David, amen, all the way down through the book of Psalms, you read where David has cried out to the Lord, oh my God, my Lord, amen, constantly crying out, Lord, I need strength in my weakness. Amen. You see, not everybody, a lot of people don't like to admit to being weak, but even the Apostle Paul, amen, he began to talk about his weakness in Corinthians. The Apostle Paul began to talk about a thorn in the flesh that he had. Now, he never went into detail and told us what that thorn in the flesh was, but he did. The Apostle Paul, he said, I do boast in my weakness. And why did he do that? Amen. Because it was his weakness that made him strong. Amen. It is mine and your weakness sometimes that will cause us to be strong. When we at our weakest point, a lot of times you and I are at our weakest point when we cry unto God and we hear no answer from God. You see, everybody gets on the mountaintop and is riding high when God's speaking, and God's saying, I'll do this, I'll do that. I promise you this, I promise you that. Every time that God's mouth flies open and speaks to them and makes them all these great promises, then all of a sudden everybody is riding high. But it's during those times that God ain't speaking to you. It's during those times you're in the midst of the storm, you're in the middle of a valley, and you're crying out to God. God, I need you. Would you hear me? God, I need you, and I need you right now. Amen. And sometimes you cry out and you'll go for days, sometimes months, even some folks go for years, crying out, God, I need an answer. Would you give me an answer? But they hear nothing. God never speaks and never gives them an answer. There's a reason behind this, why God doesn't always answer. Sometimes folks, and I'll get to this here in a little bit, but folks begin to pray, and how many times have you heard this one? Boy, I've heard this one. If I had a nickel for every time I've heard this, well, I tell you what, I'd have a lot of nickels. But said if God is real, if God is real, why don't He show up right now? You ever heard that one? Heard that before? God, if you are who you say you are, or if you are who they say you are, then why don't you prove it right here, right now? How many times have you heard that one? Man, wish I did have a nickel for every time I've heard that. I've heard it over and over. It's the words of a generation of people who not only find it hard to believe, but the one problem that we have is that they choose not to believe. Amen. A lot of times it's not about the belief system itself. It's just a choice that they make. Some folks just choose to not believe. Some folks are so negative they don't believe anything. They don't want to believe anything. If it would have happened before their very eyes, they wouldn't have it. They just, some people is just like that. I don't know what you call it, but I mean, some folks are just so messed up. No matter what got done in front of them, they still, they wouldn't believe. But they would cry out, and folks, they said, well, God, if you are who you say you are, then won't you just show up? And they choose not to believe. But you and I are living in a faithless and evil world. Amen. You and I are living in a world where folks, they have no faith in God. Why do they have no faith in God? Because most of these folks have never had an experience with God. Amen. Most of these folks have never had an experience with God. It takes an experience sometimes in order to cause somebody to believe. You see, had the Apostle Paul once then Saul had never had the experience, amen, along Damascus, as walking along the Damascus road, then we would have never known about the Apostle Paul, because he would have never became the man, no doubt, that he ended up being. And writing all the great big books, we wouldn't have half of the New Testament right now. Amen. But it was because he had an experience that turned his life around. But I want you to ask yourself a question tonight. Have you ever asked for things? Have you ever asked for God to give you a sign so that He can prove Himself to you? I know most of you ain't going to admit to that, but you've sat around and you've been in a time of distress. You've been caught up in this in this period or this point in your life to where you cried out. You guys pay attention. But you've been in this place, in this point to where you've cried out. And you've cried unto God and you've said, God, show me a sign. Lord, if this is your will, then let me see something happen over here. Let two camels walk across the road.
Help him, Lord.
Yeah. God, if that's you, then you let two vehicles pull into my yard simultaneously, and you'll name the people off. You're guilty, ain't you?